are the trends driving growth? What challenges must we overcome? And how can we prepare for a future of unprecedented opportunities? Mr. Brende is joining us virtually today, and he will be in conversation with Shireen Bhan. Shireen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to have you here with us at the Rising Bharat Summit. And it's wonderful to be joined by Børge Brende of the World Economic Forum, a man who's been tracking global trade for decades now, and a man who has a pulse check on what is happening as far as the business community globally is concerned. Børge Brende, many, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18 and on Network 18. It is a pleasure to have you here with us. Unfortunately, we have you joining us virtually. We would love to have you here with us in New Delhi. But let me start by asking you, Børge, what we've seen happen, especially since the 2nd of April, with the announcement of tariffs by President Trump, reciprocal measures being taken by different countries. As someone who's tracked global trade for decades now, is this the stuff of your nightmares, Børge?
No, thank you, and I wish I was there with you in New Delhi. It is true that we are facing unprecedented times. I would admit that in many ways, I'm glad I'm not the trade minister anymore. I could put it that way, because it is very challenging times. The largest economy in the world, the US, is almost 30% of the global GDP. With 5% of the global population. They have introduced no tariffs that are the highest ones in the US in a century. And no different countries then deal with it bilaterally. And it is a time where a lot is at stake for the global economy. That's for sure.
Well, yes, a lot is at stake, Børge, but, you know, when we were in Davos in January at the start of the year, President Trump did speak to the audience in Davos virtually, and while he had already held out the threat of tariffs, it seems to be the worst-case scenario that's playing out. And if you look at the calculation, if you look at the tariff math, this isn't really reciprocal in the sense that we expected it to be. So what do you see as the impact and the implications on global trade? Is it too early to really make an assessment of how badly this is going to impact global growth?
So the discussion about reciprocity, you know, that's a political discussion. The reality, if you look just at the numbers, the US used to have tariffs around 3%, and now they will have tariffs with the latest proposal in the mid-20s. This is one of the highest, if not the highest, among all industrialized countries. So it is a major change. How this will influence the global economy depends also on what's happening in the coming weeks. We saw, for example, the stock market, the Nikkei index in Japan increased by 6% today because there are bilateral discussions between Japan as the third largest economy in the world and US as the largest to find ways to break this impasse. So I think we know more about this in a few weeks, but of course we need all the growth that is possible because we are not back on what was trend growth for decades. We're still lower than the trend growth, and there are so many challenges, so many jobs, so many opportunities that have to be created, especially in emerging economies and frontier markets.
Yes, well, you know, speaking of opportunities as well as the road ahead, I want to build a little bit more on the retaliatory action and now the possible retaliatory action on China, with President Trump threatening another 50% tariff on China. China responding, saying that they will take countermeasures if the US were to go forward with that. If President Trump goes through with the threat of additional 50% tariffs on China, which would take the total tariffs on China above 100%, Børge, what will that mean? How are you reading that?
This will all be speculation, so I don't want to go into that because we will know the answer to this in a few weeks. at least most likely. But it is significant when the two largest economies in the world also are not seeing eye to eye on how to then deal with trade and investment between each other. So as I mentioned, the US economy is the largest, China is the second largest. Together, they're almost 45% of the global economy. So if we see a decoupling between these two economies, that is serious, because there are also areas where they depend on trading with each other. It is though important to underline that China, that is a big exporter and a big manufacturer, has reduced also their reliance on the US market during the last years. It used to be 20% of the Chinese export used to go to the US. Today, they're down to 12%. So even if the trade was going to stop, 88% of what China exports today could continue. And the US is not that relying on China either in some areas, but in other areas it is. And the challenge will be, of course, for American companies that the input factors, what they price, what they pay for what they put into their production will increase. And that can also lead to increased inflation, something that they, of course, want to avoid, because increased inflation will also, over time, lead to higher interest rates.
Yes, inflation expected to move higher and interest rates unlikely to be cut anytime soon. That's the expectation at this point in time. But Borge, let's talk about Europe. That's where you are currently. We've already heard from the EU Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen, saying that the EU is willing to negotiate, sit across the table with President Trump and the US administration, and even look at a possibility of zero tariffs. Now, what do you believe the European response is likely to be? While they have talked about taking countermeasures if the US were not to come to the negotiating table, at this point in time, do you believe the EU is essentially waiting and watching how this plays out domestically for President Trump's administration?
I think that's a good summing up of the situation. We know from Mexico-Canada situation that the tariff did change over weeks, and there were different possible outcomes. For the EU, the US market is incredibly important, and instead of then going directly into a retaliation situation, I think the Commission wants to also have a dialogue with the US administration. It's true, if you look at manufactured goods, there is a surplus on the EU side. But what the EU also then mentions is they want to bring in services and digital trade in this picture. And then they say it's a more balanced picture. And we also see that there are different signals now in the Trump administration. I saw that Elon Musk, that is still in the White House, he said that why don't we create like a customs union or zero tariffs between the EU and the US, if I interpreted it rightly. So there might be some movements there. Maybe that's also why the market in Europe today also has strengthened a little bit. And we see also that the market in the US before trading is also in green. So I think there is still some hopes that this can lead to some negotiated results that can be in all countries' favor, and also in this respect in EU and the US favor.
You talked about the relief that we are seeing across global markets. Yes, after the kind of severe beating they've taken over the last few trading sessions with, trillions of dollars being wiped out in global market cap, there is a little bit of relief on the screen at this point in time. But, I want to stick with what's happening in Europe, Borge. And when we last spoke, you did believe that perhaps this was going to be the time when Europe would do more to push difficult reforms, would do more to try and bolster economic growth. In light of the actions taken by the US in light of this reinforcement of the EU and the grouping. Do you believe that now is the time to do or die, really, so to speak? You know, a bit dramatic, but is that the moment we're at as far as Europe is concerned?
I don't think one should write off Europe at all. Europe has shown in the past to be the comeback kid. Remember in 2012, people said that Greece was bust, the euro was gone as a currency. Today, Greece is one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. And look at Spain, that also was had trouble with high unemployment, especially for youth, is now the fastest growing of the OECD countries, the developed economies. The euro is still the second strongest currency in the world. But of course, Europe also has its challenges. Inflation is on its way down. That's good. But they will need to implement the Draghi plan. There's 400 pages of proposals from a former head of the ECB, the European Central Bank, saying that one has to reduce red tape, has to make it easier to do business in Europe. And if Europe implements all this, and it's a war on talents globally, maybe Europe could be a place where also very talented people would like to live in the future. So I would not write off Europe. It's almost 20% of the global economy still. So it's incredibly important, and maybe Europe also can play a role here between the other big economies, not ending up between a rock and a hard place, but maybe say that we can work with India, we can work with China, we can also work with Latin America and the US. So there are some diplomatic opportunities here also for Europe that we should not underestimate. For example, Ursula von der Leyen, you mentioned, just recently went to Brazil and signed an agreement with Mercosur that has been on the table for decades. And Mercosur, being Brazil, Argentina, and etc., together with the EU, is almost 30% of the global GDP.
Talking about diplomatic opportunities that you believe Europe should not miss, the India-EU FTA negotiations have been on for over a decade now, Borge. Do you believe that this could perhaps speed things up? Could we see both sides moving closer to getting that deal finally done?
Yes, I think so. I was struggling for many years with the so-called EFTA deal between EFTA and India. EFTA being Switzerland and Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland, not the biggest, but together they're the 12th largest economy in the world. And I used to say the only international organization where my country, Norway, is a superpower. But anyway, we made a deal. EFTA did a deal with India, and we have seen that in the past when EFTA can do deals with big players, also EU follows. So I think this can be the push needed for an India and EU mega regional trade agreement that possibly can benefit both India and EU a lot.
Well, since we're here at the Rising India Summit, Borge, you were talking about the India-EU FTA and the possibility of that finally getting done. But how do you see India positioned today? We are, of course, in negotiations with the US for a bilateral trade agreement. We're in talks with the UK for an FTA. We're in talks with the EU for an FTA. How do you see India's role and position, and what do you believe the approach should be from here on? The speculation, the hypothesis is that India could be a net beneficiary of this move, anti-China move. But how do you see India's position at this point in time?
India is well positioned. The Indian economy is still growing much faster than most other economies. If India continues with reforms, I think easily can get 6% economic growth. If it increases the reforms, it can easily also get back to 8%. India has suddenly also become a manufacturing hub. I just looked up the numbers before this, and I saw that India is the second largest exporters of cell phones in the world. That was not the situation just 5 years ago. India has amazing talent, one of the youngest population in the world. The average age is 28% of the Indian population. More than 60% is in the age of working. A lot of other countries have not those kind of great numbers. And we know that also Prime Minister Modi has a good relationship with President Trump. So let's see if India now is able to work out also an agreement on the trade and investment side that works for India. Traditionally, though, India has been doing deals mainly based on the multilateral agreements through WTO. And for India, that has, I think, been a good starting point. But now the world has changed and we see more mega regional deals, so-called plurilateral deals, coalition of willings. And we're seeing that India is also pivoting towards doing more mega regional deals. Of course, this is up to the Indian leadership to make this kind of assessment. But it's interesting to see that approach is also changing in New Delhi.
You talked about bilateral deals that India is looking at, and you also talked about what we have seen happen on the electronic manufacturing side. In fact, reports today suggesting that Apple may redirect some of its phone supply chain to India and make more in India on account of the tariffs imposed on China. And now, given the fact that in the region, whether it's China or Vietnam, etc., the tariffs imposed by the US are higher, do you believe in the near term India is likely to benefit from the higher tariffs in the region?
That would only be speculations, but we'll also see how the tariffs develop in the coming weeks. But as I said, I think India has good relations both with the US as the largest economy in the world, and the EU is the largest market in the world, the singular market. And there's also traditionally good relations there. So let's see how India maneuvers this. But there is a lot of things working now for India if the reforms do continue. It's a startup nation too. 160,000 startups, 120 unicorns. So a new unicorn like every 20 days. Of course, India is strong on services, also relatively strong on digital trade. Those two things are growing much faster than manufacturing. But now also India is making huge progress on manufacturing. 300 now sites in India producing mobile phones. This shows that when first things move fast in India, it really moves fast.
Borge, I think something that has fallen off the headlines for the last few weeks, ever since tariffs took over, is what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Now, President Trump and President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin have been in discussion. We've seen fireworks in the White House and outside of the White House as well. What's the sense that you now get on what's happening as far as Ukraine is concerned, and what's the feeling in the business community with respect to a possible resolution now?
It's true that Ukraine has fallen a bit off the agenda because economics, tariffs, but also still the situation in the Middle East with Iran and the Gaza has had a lot of attention. And also the Houthis, of course, with freedom of maneuver, naval maneuver in the Red Sea. I think the latest on the battlefield ground in Ukraine is that the progress that the Russians had a few months ago has probably staled, and there is now also counterattacks from the Ukrainians. So there is still a situation where after 3 years of war, Russia has taken a little bit less than 20% of the territory of Ukraine. They still They control 80% of their territory. Russia went into Ukraine in the hope of taking the whole country in a week. And now after 3 years, they have 20%. So hopefully there is also now a willingness from Mr. Putin and the Russians to take up on this invitation from President Trump to then get a ceasefire and later on a peace agreement. But it seems like now that ball is in the Russian camp, and it seems like President Trump is also getting a little bit impatient if you read his body language on this.
Yes, there has been some commentary coming in from President Trump that he is losing patience, but one will have to see how this plays itself out in the context of what's happening in Ukraine. You know, the efforts to remilitarize in Europe, and there is now a lot of talk around what that could potentially mean. We've seen different countries coming out and expressing their aspiration to remilitarize, given the fact that there is now this trust deficit between the EU and the US. What could that mean for Europe, this effort to remilitarize?
It's true that Europe has, in the last decades, used far less than they used during the Cold War on the military. Some European countries even gone under 1% of GDP, but most of them are now getting closer to 2% of GDP. I think this will continue. Some countries might even go up to 3%. Poland, I think, is now close to 4%. At least that is their goal. And I think this is a reflection on the security situation. If you have a neighbor, and a big neighbor, that has just taken a piece of another country, not according to international law, quite the contrary, these countries want to have a strong military, and they know that the strong military is sometimes the best way of guaranteeing peace, because no one attacks another country if it's strong.
So, Borge, let me end by asking you, is it the end of globalization as we've come to acknowledge and get used to over the last many decades? Is it the end of the multilateral system that we've been used to, you know, whether it's the WTO or the WHO? You know, how are you reading the chain of events and what this means as far as reshaping the global order is concerned?
No, thank you. It can be looked at from different angles. Still, we should remember, though, that 70% of the global trade do happen under the rules of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. And trade is still growing, at least until the last week. We have so far this year had a growth in trade around 3%. The global growth has been around 3.2. So it's not even been shrinking. So we're trading more with each other now than at any other time in history. But with the new tariffs, it can represent also something new. And it's true that trade is not growing as fast as it used to do in decades. Trade used to be the engine behind growth. Now the growth is also coming also from other areas. I would say that we are not seeing a deglobalization, but I say that we are seeing a reglobalization, or a different globalization than in the past. There is more nearshoring, producing closer to where the products are consumed, to put it that way. There's also some friendshoring going on, that some countries say, oh, we want to then buy from the countries that we perceive as our friends. So there is also this age of nationalism. So there are countries, especially the big ones, that said, oh, this we want to produce at home due to security reasons. What we have to hope, though, is that not this end in a total decoupling, because a decoupling and disintegration of global trade will lead to contraction of the global economy. And the least thing we need now is a recession, because there is no ammunition to fight a new recession, because the countries are more indebted now than since at any other time since 1945. So let's hope that we'll continue to trade. The trade might be looking different, or some adjustments, but not let's not lose the baby with the bathwater. That would be my last appeal.
Well, let's not lose the baby with the bathwater. Let's ensure that trade continues, and let's also ensure that the world doesn't head back into contraction. It's been a difficult time through COVID, and we don't want to go right back there. Børge Brende, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us here at the Rising Bharat Summit. Appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing you here in India, and we hope to be able to discuss how these events of the last few days are going to shape global growth and the global economy. Always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Børge Brende of the World Economic Forum.